so that we're a stronger movement as a result of that. It isn't just one-way platform to people. Is that okay if we look at it in that sort of direction? Does that sound acceptable?
First of all, any contributions? Could say something first. Yep.
Right. First of all, is this working now?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? I need to hold it close, I think. First of all, I'll be brief, but thank you very, very much for inviting us here today. Sorry if you were slightly late coming, but we've just made it here, and it's fantastic to see such a great crowd here in the Malcolm X Centre, and thank you for organising it here, and thank you for organising it in this part of Bristol. With all the historic struggles that have gone on in Bristol for so long, it's great to have our meeting here tonight. Just being interviewed just now, I said that Bristol has given so much to the world, and the struggles in Bristol have given so much to the world. Think of the contribution made by two of the great parliamentarians from Bristol, Stafford Cripps and Tony Benn, who did so much to build the welfare state, and Tony Benn did so much to inspire us throughout all his life. And all the struggles that went on, such as the bus workers' strike in 1959, and the way that Tony stood up in support of them against all the racism then and at that time, and he stood up for that all of his life. So I think tonight we say thank you to Tony for everything that he did in his life. Yeah. And how much we obviously miss him. He was a very, very close friend of mine. This meeting tonight is one of many we're holding all over the country. After the general election in May, like I'm pretty sure everybody in this room, I was disappointed and very angry at the result that had happened. Angry because I can see what this Tory government is doing to people and going to do to people for the next 5 years. And as the weeks have gone on since that election, the situation has got worse and worse. In my own constituency, Islington North in London, a very mixed, multicultural, close-knit constituency, we had a great election result and a huge majority on the highest turnout we'd ever achieved, the largest majority we'd ever achieved as well. And for the first time ever, our turnout was above the national average. Now that is good news in a way, but bad news in another, because it was only 67% and it took us above the national average. Labour, unfortunately, lost the election. Now, there's lots of analyses as to why we lost, and lots of arguments about the direction which the Labour movement and Labour Party should go, and the politics that should follow from it. I look at it this way. Had Labour won the election, and I wanted Labour to win as much as anybody else, we would have been stuck with an economic policy that would still have been making cuts, that would still have been imposing austerity light on the people of this country, and would still be now cutting local authority expenditure and thus making the adult social care crisis worse. The problem was not that we were too left-wing, that we weren't distinctive enough from what the Tories did. So I think it's very important we recognise that. We then had a discussion at the LRC, Labour Representation Committee, on the 11th or 12th of May, the day after the Parliamentary Labour Party meeting. At the Parliamentary Labour Party meeting the night before, there was very big attendance, very long discussion about the election, and myself and a number of others made the point that austerity was the issue, our failure to offer something different was the issue, and that instead of having a leadership contest, there should be a much longer reflection on that for a real debate throughout the Labour movement, not just the party, the unions and everybody else, about the political direction in which we want to go, where the Labour movement's going to place itself. That wasn't to be. The National Executive, whose wisdom is infinite and exercised its infinite wisdom on that occasion, decided that there would be a leadership contest and then set the timetable for it, which is a very long timetable. We still have another 8 weeks to go, so we're only halfway through. And there was then a discussion amongst a number of us about whether we should try and field a candidate or not. There's a requirement that 15% of all MPs, all Labour MPs, have to nominate, so it's a high threshold of 35 MPs. We decided we would do that. I was asked to be the name that went forward, the candidate, and I agreed to do that. And we started off with a brilliant start. We had 11 nominations, so it was a great start. The next day we had a big surge when it went up to 12 when I nominated myself. And then afterwards it began to grow a bit more, and we got up to 20 and so on and so on. And during that time there was a big debate. Some MPs, genuinely, who do not necessarily agree with the political position that we're putting forward here tonight, nevertheless said that it was a legitimate position and should be open for party members and supporters to vote upon. So they nominated, even though they're not necessarily going to vote for us. But then others were very reluctant. And then what happened was a remarkable thing. There were hundreds and hundreds of emails and messages and phone calls sent from all over the country to particular MPs saying, please give us a voice, please allow us to have a debate, please allow the voice. And so finally, we eventually passed 35 with 2 minutes to go on that Monday morning, and we were therefore part of the contest. And I'm very, very grateful to anyone in this room that did their best to ensure that this contest actually takes place. So, the issues of this campaign, to my mind, are really three. The first one is the economic issue. The banking crisis of 2008-2009 was not caused by the greed of social care workers, bus drivers, street cleaners, or any of those people. They're not the ones. They're not the ones who evade tax and put their savings in offshore bank accounts. They're not the ones who invest in the subprime mortgage crisis in the USA. The banking crisis was caused by lack of regulation of the banks and all those issues that go with it. And so the initial response of the government in that time to take the banks into public ownership was the right thing to do. I was okay about that. The problem was that they weren't really taken into public ownership. There was shares bought in them, there was capital injected in them, there was quantitative easing injected into what they did by a massive amount. But it was not the same as public ownership of those banks. Those banks weren't directed to cut the excessive pay of executives and the bonuses that they got. They weren't directed to invest in manufacturing industry and infrastructure. They were to carry on much as before. And so I find it very strange when I'm writing to publicly owned banks saying, will they please give a loan to somebody that's starting a small enterprise and things like this. They would rather give their money into yet more house price inflation. So I think we missed a very big trick there by not properly controlling those banks. Then we went into the situation more deeply, and the narrative was that the debt was too big, the loans were too many, and therefore the way to deal with it was to cut public expenditure. Of course, once you start cutting public expenditure, you start making people redundant. When you make people redundant from public sector work, they end up often working on worse conditions for longer hours, on lower pay, with worse pensions. Therefore, they are worse off. The state is worse off because they get less in taxation from them. It's actually a downward spiral, which is of no help to anybody. And so the cuts get deeper and deeper. And that economic strategy actually doesn't do anything in the long run except allow those in the finance industry possibly to make a great deal of money, damage the life chances of a very large number of other people, lead to huge cuts in public expenditure, lead to problems in local government and in health and every other area, and a deepening adult social care crisis in Britain. And so I think we have to challenge the whole austerity agenda and that which goes with it. What the government has done this week, or last week in the budget, first of all, George Osborne and Cameron seem to have a real problem with young people. They want to take away the allowances for the third and subsequent children in any large family, which seems to me to be something deeply odious about that. Surely every child matters. Every child should be treated exactly the same. And they also want to take away the remaining, and they are the remaining, grant facilities, maintenance grant facilities for children of poorer families going to university and turn those into loans. We already have now a whole generation of young people leaving university with massive debts. We're now going to extend that even further. Is it really right that we've allowed the student fee basis to become the financial basis of universities rather than public funding of it? And when people tell me, well, actually you can't ever get rid of fees because it's necessary, I put it this way. If somebody becomes a very good engineer that comes out of university, or a very good doctor that comes out of university, they become a good engineer and a good doctor, we all benefit from that. We travel on a safer train because a good engineer designed it. We're in a safer building because there was a good architect. We're better in our health because there's a good doctor. Education isn't just about individual gain and individual advancement. It's about the advancement of society as a whole. We should look at it in that way. And so the next part of the Tory agenda is the welfare reform bill, so-called, this week. Now, I was beyond disgusted at the way in which welfare benefits have been basically attacked the whole time throughout the last Parliament. The numbers of people that have come to me who are on various disability benefits, who were then approved, passed, or whatever, or said, you are ready for work, when they clearly were not able to work. They then appeal against it, usually win the appeal, but in the meantime, go through hell and high water trying to survive, many suffering very deep stress as a result, and many, sadly, have died or taken their own lives as a result of this brutal system of those kind of fitness for work tests, which I just think are really utterly wrong in society. Now, I travel around Britain quite clearly, and I'm constantly shocked by the numbers and increasing numbers of people that I find sleeping rough, homeless people, begging on the streets. You go to any South Coast town in summer, and you find large numbers of people just trying to sleep rough, make ends meet, beg a bit, try and survive in some way. I talk to a lot of these people. They've all been through individual crises. There's always sadness involved. There's sometimes mental illness, there's family breakup, there's homelessness, there's eviction, there's loss of jobs. There's many, many very sad stories around it. And we as a society have reduced ourselves to allowing an underclass to live this marginal existence, relying on soup kitchens and food banks in order to survive, and that's all they're doing, surviving, and accepting that somehow or other it's normal. If I asked you all to put your hands up in this room and say, do you support healthcare as a human right, free at the point of use? Every one of you would put your hands up. There's no need to, I'm assuming an overwhelming majority of that. I'm absolutely assuming that. When those very brave people in the 1930s, during the Great Depression, were campaigning against the means test and all the brutality that went with it, they envisaged a post-war, they didn't know the war was coming, of course, but they envisaged a welfare state that would guarantee everyone against destitution. Not particularly revolutionary, it was Beveridge who coined that phrase, and he was actually a liberal. He didn't consider himself to be a socialist, but he felt a civilized society should have a system that guarantees anyone against destitution. Somewhere along the line, we've allowed large holes to be cut into that safety net. And we now see it as an act of policy that there should be holes in that safety net. So when the latest welfare reform bill came along, which does a number of things, one of which is to introduce a benefits cap, and the other is to reduce benefits all round, and also to have qualifying periods for some benefits for non-British nationals and things like that. It's taken away that whole principle of the universality of the welfare state. I think we should be proud to live in a society where we did make sure that one of our primary objectives was to eliminate poverty and destitution in total and say everyone deserves to be able to live reasonably with a roof over their head and not be consigned to sleeping rough on the streets. Surely that would be a good measure of a civilised society. It is actually true. Some people say to me, this is all kind of cuckoo land stuff, and why shouldn't there be a benefit cap anyway? Well, I represent an inner-city London constituency where the benefit cap is brutal in the ways it operates. It's brutal because it puts a cash limit on what any family can receive. The rent levels are so high because there's no regulation of the rent level. Therefore, those families that don't get enough benefit in order to pay the rent are then forced to move away. Kids have to change school or travel very long distances to go to school. Caring arrangements are destroyed. Communities are broken up. Families are broken up. Surely we could do things a bit different, like building more council houses for a start. Secondly, by controlling the private rented sector and the rent levels within it, so that we don't end up with a welfare system which actually does a combination of two quite wrong things. One is to subsidise high rent. The other, through in-work benefits, is to subsidise low wages. Surely we should think about those two things and go for a £10 an hour minimum wage and also control the private rented sector. And so part of this campaign is against the welfare reform bill, and that is why I was one that declined to support the so-called reasoned amendment put forward by my front bench, because it included in it approval of the benefit cap, which I do not approve of for all the reasons that I'm voting against the bill, and I will continue to vote against that bill. But it's not all about benefits and welfare, it's also about the kind of jobs and economy we want to create in the future. We have a very strange system in this country where instead of encouraging people to develop good quality manufacturing industry jobs, using the skills of people that are certainly there, using all that brilliance that's there, we spend far too much time creating a financial services-based economy rather than a manufacturing economy. And so we had a very long presentation yesterday with economic strategy, which includes a national investment bank, which includes creating of sustainable jobs, green energy jobs, high technology jobs, and developing the manufacturing basis of our economy. Bristol as an area has a massive manufacturing heritage. Fantastic planes, cars, ships, all those things have been made in this area. Enormous skills are around here. I think we need an investment bank that provides for the development of those kind of jobs, development of those kind of industries, and particularly providing real opportunities and hope for young people. And we feel very strongly Then the last two things I want to say, quite simply this, I could go on for a long time, but that would be wrong. I just want to say this. Internationally, I am somebody that comes from the tradition of the peace movement, from the Campaign for Disarmament and the Stop the War Coalition, and I therefore absolutely opposed the Iraq War in 2003, and I was surrounded by massive rally in Hyde Park on that day with more than 1 million people there, and the huge feeling amongst such a wide range of people that this war was wrong, it was illegal, it was unnecessary, and that the derivation of that war would not be good. We didn't stop that war, unfortunately, despite there being 140 Labour MPs voting against it. It was 139, but I always include Dennis Skinner as 140 because he was having open heart surgery that day and obviously could not be present to vote. So we lost on that one. The war went ahead. Wars don't ever really end that simply. There's never one moment when a war is over. The results of those wars go on for a very long time. It's not the only reason, but it's one of the forces that have led to the growth of ISIL within the region. Many of those people that are now desperate, trying to survive in the Mediterranean, are results of the conflagrations all over the area, including Libya. And the growth of Islamophobia and intolerance is also a factor within that. Wouldn't it be nice if we had a government that was committed wholly to human rights and trying to resolve conflicts and bring about peace in the world, rather than being ever ready to go to war alongside England? The last point I make on international issues is that of nuclear weapons. We are faced with a decision next year of whether or not to renew the Trident nuclear missile system. It's going to cost £100 billion. It will provide us with yet another generation of nuclear missiles. I was at the United Nations Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference in May in New York. And I was also at the Humanitarian Effects of War Conference in Vienna last year, in December. At that conference in Vienna, there was a description of what would happen if a nuclear bomb went off anywhere in the world. It was presented by the foreign minister of the Marshall Islands, who as a child witnessed nuclear testing and the destruction of his country and his homeland as a result. And they described what the ecological effect was, what the local environmental effects were, what the climatic effects were, and all the other effects of one explosion anywhere in the world were. And then we get to the review conference itself, and this is about the Non-Proliferation Treaty, in which the 5 declared nuclear weapon states agree to take steps towards disarmament. All the other non-declared nuclear weapon states, or non-nuclear weapon states rather, agree that they will never get nuclear weapons. Britain and the United States and all the others said they needed nuclear weapons for their own security. Abdul Minty, anti-apartheid campaigner, former victim of the apartheid regime in South Africa, spoke and said quite simply he was proud to represent South Africa, proud that they'd given up nuclear weapons, proud that Africa was a nuclear weapons-free continent, and he said they did it because they wanted to be secure, because they weren't going to be threatening any of their neighbours with nuclear weapons. That's real security. This thought. There's such talent, such enthusiasm, such brilliance in the Labour Party, in the Labour movement, in the unions, in the campaigns for a different, better and alternative way of approaching things. A society that cares for all and everybody cares for everybody else. It's not complicated, it's socialist. And there's also such enthusiasm. And this is the first time that the election for a leader of the Labour Party has come about from a popular vote amongst members and supporters with no other access to the vote at all. And it's very, very interesting, the reaction this is provoking amongst some people. So I hope that we can have a bit of a discussion. We're having lots of meetings, we're having a few more hustings around the country, and the debate is fascinating. The numbers of people that are coming forward on it. And those people that are not afraid of dreaming, hoping, working, campaigning for a better, more just society in which everyone matters, everyone is treated properly, everyone is housed, and everyone has some hope in their lives, and we don't disrespect, disregard, ignore, commit acts of prejudice against anybody else. A cohesive, strong society is one that can achieve things. A society that condemns minorities, objects to people because of the colour of their skin, their disability, their faith or anything else, is a weak society. Let's be a strong one. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy.